Hello and welcome to the Small Business Briefing. I'm Brian Kelly, CEO of the Small Business Association of Michigan. And Sarah, where are you at?
Well, Brian, I took advantage of you working from home today to borrow your office. We actually have a full house here at SBAM, and so I was displaced today. So hope you don't mind me squatting for a little bit. But we are going to start off today with some news about the presidential primary. So, Brian, no surprises on who the winners were. We've outlined this many times. You even said there will be no surprises, but let's examine insights beyond the fact that the expected winners emerged. So, what did we learn?
All right, so we have there's actually a lot of interesting things. So the least interesting thing was that Biden won the Democratic nomination, Trump won the Republican nomination. But underneath all of that was a series of sub stories, and those sub stories, some of them have to do with the presidential election, but also other elections that are happening in Michigan as we look at the landscape. And the first one is about this uncommitted issue, like with this as being an option on all presidential primaries in Michigan. In law that one of your options is uncommitted. And it's not, you don't write in uncommitted, or it's not that you just didn't vote. You fill in the bubble behind uncommitted as though uncommitted was a candidate. And so I would say that the uncommitted vote was perhaps a little higher than it was last time there was a similar election. So the last time you had an incumbent president running for reelection without serious opposition. How many were uncommitted at that time? So if you go back in history, when did that happen last time? It was 2012 with Barack Obama. And at that time, just over 10% or about 11% went uncommitted. This time, that number is a few percent higher, about 13%. So on its surface, President Biden and his team might look at that and say, "All right, that's pretty much in line, not too far off what it was before." However, if you look at certain communities within Michigan, and especially to zero in on the communities that have higher proportions of Arab Americans that would normally very heavily support uh, President Biden, in this case, you saw about 75% of the vote go to uncommitted in Dearborn and Hamtramck, and there's a few other communities as well, but those being the big ones, and that proportion is kind of eye popping. So the top line number and the overall impact on the statewide results, the Biden campaign might look at and say, yeah, not as bad as it could have been. But given how close elections are in Michigan, I know that there has to be some concern about just the impacts, the ramifications later on. What does that mean for turnout later on in the election? It's hard to imagine a scenario where those communities switch over and vote on the Republican side of the ticket. It's not That would be an unusual type of result. But if you saw significantly depressed turnout or just not voting at the presidential level, Michigan is a close enough election to where this has to be a concern for their campaign.
So, you mentioned the turnout and talking about November, but how was the turnout for the primary compared to similar primary past elections?
This turnout was pretty average, so it was about what was expected, about what the election officials had prepared for. So it wasn't one of these ones where it was any more anemic than primary elections are. But primary elections always have less turnout than general elections. So it was about average when it comes to turnout from a percentage of a voter standpoint, and that is but when you look between the two elections, because essentially we think of it as one election, right? There's an election, the Republican primary election, the Democratic primary election. These are two different elections that are just held on the same day. So you notice that when you go into vote, you get one ballot or the other. There's totally separate ballots. So these are two separate elections held at the same time. Um, there was more of a competition on the Republican side. So you had two um, candidates with real kind of funding and campaign organizations behind them. There were multiple candidates on the ballot with President Biden, but not well funded, not well organized, and so it was kind of like unopposed on that side, and more of a contest, but not a dramatic contest. It was never close. It was never going to be close on the Republican side. So you saw the turnout on the Republican side a little higher. I actually typed out the numbers in total. 756,000 people voted in the Democratic primary. And on the Republican side, it was actually quite a bit higher. 1.1 million Republicans voted, or people voted in the Republican primary. And not particularly surprising that the Republican primary was higher, given that there was a little bit more of a contest on that side. But the discrepancy in those two numbers is actually another thing that I found was kind of an interesting insight. A lot more participation in the Republican primary than the Democratic primary this time.
All right, and this was the first election where Michigan held formal early voting. So obviously we've had absentee voting, and there's been some substantial increases with absentee voting in the past, but this was the first time you could go to a polling station and vote early in person. So was there any discernible impact?
I think the early kind of reaction across the state was that it was a really, really expensive feature to offer, given how few people participated in it. So the participation overall in early voting, again, as you had mentioned, separate from absentee voting. You can vote absentee early, that's through the mail, or you could, in my township, go to the clerk's house and get your, fill out the thing on your car hood, and, but there's like the idea of going to a polling station and voting that was brand new in this election, kind of kicking the tires, if you will, on it. And while I think probably some analysis will be done in the future to determine like how expensive it was compared to how many people voted. I actually talked to my local. I live in a rural county, Ionia County, between Kent and Ingham, and so I asked the county clerk, like, how expensive was it per vote? How expensive was it to run these polling stations, and then divided by how many people voted. And it was like $300 per vote. Pretty expensive when you think about it. So I would say that no real discernible impact on voting. Absentee voting continues to grow and be a more and more substantial part of the overall election results. But early voting, I would say, was kind of a flop.
It's funny, I had every intention of trying out the new early voting in person, and then I was one of the last people to vote on Tuesday. So my plan backfired. Maybe in November. All right, let's talk about the two winners here in Michigan. What should Biden be most concerned with, and what should he be happy about based on his performance here in Michigan?
I thought what I would do is just share a picture of Biden's election results. And I borrowed this from MLive, this map here. So MLive does great kind of pictures of data. And so I borrowed this from one of their articles. You could see with President Biden, where he wasn't really no serious opposition. Again, other candidates on the ballot, but no real serious opposition. So color coded here, you see 80% or higher. Most of the states had 80% or higher, less than 80%, and then a couple of counties, including, interestingly, one up here in the Upper Peninsula, but these two down here, which this is, of course, Wayne County, and then next to Wayne County, Washtenaw County. So this is where Ann Arbor is. And so two major counties where the uncommitted vote exceeded 15%, and where for the whole county. So not just those communities that I mentioned before. So that's a pretty significant outcome considering the size of those counties. So I think that the concerns are basically threefold. First is participation in that side was a lot lower than the Republican primary, so 756,000 instead of 1.1 million. They've got to be somewhat concerned about that. Is their base really fired up? a portion of the base in some really, really key areas. If you look at the way elections turn out in Michigan, you've got some counties that usually go for the Democrat and some counties usually go for the Republican, but that where they really build up a high margin, Democrats who win the state build up a high margin in Wayne and Washtenaw County. Those are two of their strongest counties, typically in elections. So the fact that those elections uncommitted did so well, again, has to really be something that is concerning. And then the other thing that I think the concern would be is over here. This is Kent County. So Kent County is um, a county that has been kind of trending more toward Democrats in recent years, and I think that as has say Oakland County, but you see Oakland County, President Biden did quite well, and a little softer in Kent County. So this idea of kind of continuing the march in Kent County that used to be a Republican stronghold, they got to be somewhat concerned about that. Now, what are they happy about? Well, I think they've got to be happy about the uncommitted vote being just a couple percentage higher than it was before. So statewide, it didn't seem like as big a deal as it potentially could have been. The other thing I think the Biden campaign would be really happy about is the way that Oakland County, that uncommitted vote and that impact in Oakland County didn't hit the president like it did in other places. And Oakland County has become increasingly important to Democrats. So I think that's really the things that there's kind of a mixed bag of things. Some things would be happy and satisfied with, some things they're a bit concerned about.
All right, and so the same analysis for Trump. Like what is he celebrating after his victory here, and what's he concerned with?
So this story is a little bit more complicated to tell because it was a contested election that you had an actual funded campaign on the other side with Nikki Haley, and so if you were to look at just kind of across the board here, a few of the concerns would be that first Oakland County. So Oakland County, which has really been a weak county for Donald Trump in previous elections, that these results would show that yeah, still relatively soft support compared to other places. They would definitely be happy with the turnout, 1.1 million. But if you take a third of that vote, those kind of independents and a lot of them that voted for Nikki Haley. The question is, do they stay with Trump or do they move to Biden in the general election? It's a big open question. But the fact that Oakland County still looks soft, I think would be a concern. The other thing is, remember I said that Kent County was soft for Biden, also soft for Trump. So these two counties, Kent and Oakland, which are so important in elections, are both. I think both candidates would look at it and say, "Can't take them for granted. Got a lot of work to do in trying to win statewide elections because those are such vote-rich counties. They have so much, so many people. Especially in Kent County has been changing so much that it's kind of feels like it's at a tipping point, and it could go either way." But I think overall, the fact that in most places in the state that the win was 2-1. Trump won 2-1 over a pretty well funded challenger would suggest that they feel pretty good that they're at least holding their base together. So whereas Biden's biggest concern, I think, is probably holding his base together, not so much as attracting independent voters. With Trump, you can look at it and say the base looks really strong based on where the most Republican rich counties, the way that turned out. But the independent voters are the biggest question mark there. So Michigan is a very, very complicated story to tell, and it's the reason why I think that that Michigan is going to be the state or one of the few states that ends up deciding the next president of the United States.
All right, so anything else, any other takeaways about the environment leading into November in the general?
Yeah, just a couple other things down ticket. Okay, so we've been talking about the top of the ticket, but keep in mind that there will be state legislative races that happen across the state, 110 districts all across the state. They're all up for reelection this year. And what happens at the top of the ticket, the very first person, whether it's president or governor, okay, so every other election, either president and governor at the top, what happens at the top of the ticket can have an impact down the ticket with other candidates. So when I look at these counties and say, okay, Oakland County, which is a real battleground state where there's a lot of state representative seats that are competitive, the fact that Biden looked strong and Trump looked a little soft there means that probably those state representative races in the Oakland County area, the Republicans are pretty concerned about. When you look at Kent County, it looks like a battleground because neither candidate looked particularly strong or dominant there. And so that's a state that, or I mean, a county that will really be kind of up for grabs. But then looking at over here with, actually, let me, in this area here, so you got Jackson and Calhoun counties that I'm identifying down here. Those counties, there are very competitive seats that where Republicans are defending and where Democrats are defending. And President Trump looked pretty strong there. President Biden didn't look weak there, but the fact that that Trump is as strong, he's got to put those races kind of back on the map where people are really going to look closer at him. And then looking up here in this area, which is an area that Republicans used to be able to take for granted. But here's the thing, and it looked softer for Trump. But what's happened is that a lot of the folks from down here have moved up here. I mean, there's been a big migration, and this whole West Coast, there's some Chicago influence that kind of moves up the coast here. So the when you look at the legislative races in these counties where the top of the ticket is either strong or weak, that's where I think there'll be potentially some fallout in the election as we get into the fall, where the state representatives are a key and critical race, because right now they're so evenly divided. Right now they're literally 54-54, two empty seats. They'll eventually go 56 Democrats to 54 Republicans, just the nature of the two open seats. When it's that close, top of the ticket and how it performs can have a major impact. When I look at this map, I can see areas where Trump helps and hurts Republicans. I can see areas where Biden helps and hurts Democrats, and that is, I think that what that tells the story of is one of turnout. You know, who can turn out their base more? So you might think, hey, they're going to try to go after independents. I don't know. When I look at these results, I think that the campaigns are going to spend more time on turning out their base than anything else, because it's something that they know, and that has been reliable. So not necessarily a good public policy strategy, but electorally, this really paints a picture where I think that the two sides, the two campaigns, are going to first work hard to lock down their bases.
All right. Well, it's going to be here before we know it. The rate this year's flying by, so we'll keep everyone updated. All right, one more election related piece of news today, and that is that there is a new candidate who could be a real contender in our U.S. Senate race here in Michigan.
Yeah, this one, it's not that often you have a totally open race. So Debbie Stabenow is retiring in the United States Senate, and has been kind of an institution. Has been there for a long time, and probably would have cruised to a reelection if she decided to run for reelection. Probably, I mean, she would have. I mean, but she's decided to retire, and a totally open seat is so unusual that it has drawn a lot of interest. So we mentioned last time that on the Democratic side that joining Alyssa Slotkin was Hill Harper, and there's some question, how serious is he going to be? But he turned in signatures. He's on the ballot. On the Republican side, there's a bunch of candidates. There was some indication that former Congressman Justin Amash would get in the race. And he announced today that he's going to. He had an exploratory committee today. He has said via X, formerly Twitter, that he's in, and he's going to run as a Republican. So Amash has been more of a libertarian leaning Republican in the past, and then joined the Libertarian Party, but running for the Republican nomination in November. So this does change the landscape somewhat. It and it'll play into the presidential politics as well. I think it makes it more likely, probably makes it more likely that Donald Trump gets involved in some way in picking a favorite candidate in the election, because there's no history that there's bad blood between, or no secret that there's bad blood between Justin Amash and Donald Trump. But there are so many candidates. This is an election where you got Mike Rogers, you got Peter Meyer, you got Sandy Pensler, and Justin Amash now, Nikki Snyder on the State Board of Education. There's so many candidates that really anything goes in an election like this. Like a person get far fewer than 50% of the vote and win the nomination heading into November. Where on the other side, even though there are multiple candidates, Alyssa Sotkin still looks like a powerhouse, probably roll through that primary and meet the Republican contender that I think may end up being a photo finish here at the end.
All right. We'll keep everyone posted as this moves forward. Okay, let's talk about redistricting. We have new maps that have been drawn. I think you're going to share those with us.
Yeah, I wanted to share or show you what the redistricting commission has been up to, and see if I can actually find my having a hard time sharing or finding the maps. I was going to show the maps. I think what I'll do is I'll just pull up oh, here we go. So the first thing I want to do is share with you or show you what the maps currently look like. So there were 7 state rep districts that the U.S. Court of Appeals said were drawn illegally. The term that they used were racially gerrymandered. And what the problem was, to see all these long pillar districts. So District 5 goes from way up here and then it goes way down here. And so what they ended up doing when drawing these districts was they would take the southern parts of these pillar districts. So you got District 6, District 7, District 8, 14 somewhat, and 13, 12, 11, and then 10 going along the river. In these districts, they split up the Detroit vote, and the Detroit vote being the black vote, with and there was record of every word that they said, and it seemed very explicit. The court said that they had sought to limit the number of black voters in any one district, and which is illegal and constitutionally illegal. So illegal, it's against the statutory law, but also the Court of Appeals decided on the basis of the 14th Amendment, so to the Constitution. So this is where it started. These pillar districts were the main problem, but if you change those, it has an impact on others. So remember when I said, yeah, they determined that 7 were illegal, but I thought several more, maybe twice as many, would have to be redrawn, because when you change the district lines, you affect other districts around them. And here's what the redistricting commission has turned into to the courts for approval. So remember this, they voted, and I think it was 10-3, the redistricting commission voted to approve this map as a cure for the previous maps. So they turn those maps into the court. The court still has to approve it. And the court approved a separate expert to draw a backup map in case the redistricting commission failed. And they've got to get these done because elections are coming up. All right. It's off the picture here, but down here is district number 2. But the districts 1 through 14 are the ones that got redrawn. So there were 14 districts that got impacted. Amazingly, no incumbents were put together with other incumbents. That's extraordinary to me. I don't think that would accidentally happen. I think that's something that they would have to have done on purpose, is to try to not put incumbents in with each other, which in the old days was a normal thing. Map drawers tried to make sure you didn't pit incumbents against each other. they're not really supposed to take that into consideration now. But anyway, you see these are more compact. These districts are more compact, and they follow jurisdictional lines more closely. So while on the map they might look ugly because there's jagged lines all over the place, but they've broke fewer municipal boundary lines. So they don't have districts that stretch from Detroit up into the suburbs of Oakland County anymore, where it just goes from through a whole bunch of jurisdictions, but doesn't include all of any of them. Um, Now they respect municipal or jurisdictional lines much more closely than they did before. My first impression at that is that the court is likely to accept this map. Now they could make some tweaks. There could be some areas that have to be changed, but my initial thought is that they'll probably accept it. The In terms of the overall makeup or the partisan breakdown, like some districts Republicans have a better chance, some districts Democrats have a better chance. In this case, these are all 14 of these districts. Democrats either have a huge advantage or an edge. There are some of them though where it looks to me like they would go to more competitive. So go from being like slam dunk type races for Democrats to being something that wouldn't be a slam dunk, but still would be kind of lean Democratic. So that's um, you have to be known for sure that these maps are accepted, but I think they stand a pretty good chance based on just a cursory review of the court's decisions, compare the court's previous decision and their problems compared to this map that was submitted.
All right. Let's talk next about a new threat that's kind of bubbling under the surface at the Capitol. And this is about an issue that we have successfully fought off in the past here at the state level. So, Brian, what's going on?
You've heard us talk a lot about independent contractors. This is seeds of new small business. Our independent contractors also many small businesses utilize independent contractors to grow and to get the job done and to compete. There have been many efforts at the state and the federal level to restrict and limit who can be classified as an independent contractor. So at the state level, we've been pretty successful in fighting this off. The U.S. Department of Labor, as we covered on this briefing, they have approved a new rule. So it's not a law through Congress, but a new rule in the Department of Labor that significantly limits independent contractors in the future. So that's happened. So March 11th, that goes into effect. We've talked about it. Please review those rules and make sure you're compliant. But the big concern that we have is that the House Labor Committee has held a hearing on the new federal rules, and with the thought being that they would consider codifying the federal rules into Michigan law, which of course we would have a big problem with. So why would we have a big problem with it? If it's already a federal rule, then why would we have a problem with Michigan law? I have a lot of confidence that the federal rule will be litigated and significantly changed in the future. And especially if they're aggressive in how they impose it. I also have a lot of confidence that that rule will be changed in the future through just administrative action by future presidents. And because it just doesn't, it's not going to work well. It's going to cause a bunch of problems. So let's say I'm right. And on these things, I mean, hopefully people realize I'm usually right, that the federal rule does change in the future, but they codified it into law in Michigan. We'll be stuck with it until a new law passes in Michigan. So we want to make sure that this new federal rule does not get codified in Michigan law. If it does look like it gets legs, if it does look like it's going to move through, you'll definitely see SBAM go to action. We'll ask for help from our members to really descend on the system and push back on the idea of locking us into a bad federal rule that we have a lot of confidence will be changed in the future.
All right, like Brian said, we'll keep you posted if there's any action we need you to take. All right, before we wrap up today, Brian, it does seem like there might be a short-term deal that will avert a federal shutdown.
Yeah, so another short-term deal. There was we heard actually from some of our members that have federal contracts really concerned if there'd be a federal government shutdown, and it looks like at least for another month or so, they'll and they're not at a point where they seem to be able to put some of the longer-term issues to bed, but The leadership on either side of the aisle also do not seem to want to create the type of turmoil that that the closures would create in the system. So for now, it appears as though that's been averted, but right around the corner, the same issue will be knocking on our doorstep again.
All right. Well, that is everything we have for you today. We appreciate you tuning in. Have a great rest of your week. We'll be back here Monday at 3 p.m.
Thanks, everybody. See you next week.